Welcome back to the Context Channel. I'm Emily, and today we turn our attention back to the Middle East, specifically the Gaza Strip, where a fragile ceasefire, agreed upon last month, is collapsing under the weight of constant violence and a devastating humanitarian crisis. The headlines are grim, suggesting that for the people on the ground, the war never really ended. We've seen reports of an escalation in Israeli strikes, the confirmed killing of a top Hamas commander, and UNICEF reporting that 2 children are being killed every single day, even during this so-called pause in fighting. The truce, supported by President Trump's 20-point plan, is now a diplomatic battlefield. Joining me to dissect the geopolitical chess game and the economic pressures at play is Dr. Richard Cole, our expert in geopolitics and economic warfare. Richard, thank you for stepping into this very complex discussion.
Emily, the word fragile doesn't even begin to cover it. We are seeing a new phase of the conflict, a low-intensity war being fought under the cover of a ceasefire. For both sides, the truce is less about peace and more about establishing strategic positions for the next phase. The recent spike in violence confirms the system is buckling.
Let's establish the current reality on the ground. The ceasefire technically began on October 10th, but reading the sources, the Hindu, Al Jazeera, the UN reports, it sounds like the truce has been purely theoretical for Gaza's residents. What is the latest data telling us about the violence?
The numbers are shocking and illustrate the complete collapse of the ceasefire's spirit. As the UN and Gaza health officials report, at least 280 Palestinians have been killed and over 670 injured since the pause began. Crucially, UNICEF is reporting that 67 children have been killed in conflict-related incidents since October 10th. That's an average of 2 children every day.
2 children a day during a ceasefire. That is an impossible number to process.
It is. And the strikes are not isolated. Reports from the New York Times and the Associated Press confirm a significant escalation over the weekend, with strikes across the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military stated these strikes came after a Palestinian gunman opened fire on Israeli troops in the south, calling it an extreme violation of the truce.
And Hamas, through its sources, immediately accuses Israel of fabricating pretexts to renew the war of extermination, as one official said. So we have 2 completely opposing narratives on who breaks the truce, but the result is the same. Children are dying.
Exactly. The core strategic friction happens at the yellow line, the demarcation established in the truce that separates the Israeli-controlled zone from the designated humanitarian areas. Both sides accuse the other of using the truce for tactical gain. Israel says militants are using humanitarian routes to attack troops. Hamas says Israel is targeting militant infrastructure deep within what should be safe zones. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of counter-violence, where each retaliation further erodes the political will to maintain the pause.
One of the major confirmed events in the last 48 hours was the Israeli military's confirmation of the killing of Alaa Hadidi, whom they identified as the chief of supply in Hamas's weapons manufacturing headquarters. The Times of Israel confirmed this strike. Richard, from a geopolitical and economic perspective, what is the impact of taking out a logistics commander like this versus a field commander?
Killing a logistics or supply commander, Lena, is an act of economic warfare. A field commander is replaceable, often within days. But Hadidi was described by the IDF as a central source of knowledge in supply and weapons production. This goes beyond the immediate battlefield. This targets the military's industrial base, the ability to procure materials, manage supply chains, and manufacture rockets and equipment locally. It forces Hamas to dedicate scarce financial resources and manpower to rebuilding the supply chain, which often relies on illicit or complex international routes. This strike hits Hamas's long-term economic viability as a military entity, not just its current operation. It's a strategic move designed to increase Hamas's cost of conflict dramatically, even during a ceasefire.
That's a fascinating layer to this. It's less about the immediate battle and more about destroying the capital assets of the opposing force. Now, let's talk about the political backdrop. The UN Security Council recently adopted Resolution 2803, which endorsed the Trump administration's plan for Gaza. What does this resolution, which includes an International Stabilization Force, ISF, mean for the current violence?
It means very little for the immediate violence. Unfortunately, the resolution is about post-conflict governance, not current ceasefire enforcement. It creates a blueprint authorizing an ISF and transitional arrangements for a reformed Palestinian Authority to eventually govern Gaza. But the problem is, as one UN report noted, the commitment to implement the plan is highly fragile.
Why is it fragile?
Because the primary party, Hamas, has already rejected the disarmament components of the plan. They see the International Stabilization Force as an occupation force aligned with Israel. Furthermore, as we discussed in the last episode, China and Russia abstained from the resolution, expressing reservations about the ambiguous language on Palestinian statehood. So, the resolution provides diplomatic cover for the US and Israel to plan the future, but it lacks the universal political muscle needed to halt the rockets and the airstrikes today.
It seems like the entire world is trying to impose a political solution on top of an ongoing, active war.
Exactly. And while the political debate rages, the human catastrophe accelerates. Lena, the humanitarian situation is arguably the most alarming aspect of the current phase. The ceasefire was meant to prioritize aid delivery, but UN and Red Cross reports paint a devastating picture.
What are the key bottlenecks or the biggest disasters being reported right now?
It boils down to shelter, sanitation, and disease, exacerbated by the season. 1. Winter storms and flooding. OACHA reports that recent heavy rains have flooded makeshift shelters, destroying an estimated 13,000 tents. Displaced children are reportedly sleeping in clothes sodden with sewage water, as the sanitation systems have completely collapsed. This directly leads to the second point. 2. Disease risk. The mixture of floodwater, raw sewage, and overcrowding creates a perfect storm for preventable diseases like cholera. The collapse of the health system means that even if a disease outbreak occurs, the ability to treat it is non-existent. 3. Food insecurity. While aid trucks are entering, WFP is hitting about 2/3 of its daily target. The prices in the few open markets are out of reach for most people. A kilo of meat costs $20. So, despite aid, the majority still rely on food parcels, and many families are reporting they are eating only one meal a day.
The human toll is compounding. It's not just the direct casualties of the strikes, but the slow, agonizing death from lack of shelter and clean water. And OCHA also noted ongoing Israeli operations in the West Bank that are displacing thousands and leading to settler violence. It's a regional crisis, not just a Gaza one.
It is absolutely regional. The West Bank displacement figures are alarming. 32,000 residents of northern refugee camps have been displaced due to Israeli security operations, constituting the largest displacement of Palestine refugees there since 1967. The issue of illegal settlement expansion and settler violence continues, with the UK's Foreign Secretary himself calling the Israeli response insufficient. It confirms that the core drivers of the conflict, land, borders, and governance, are active across the entire region, constantly undermining any chance of a stable Gaza truce.
It creates an impossible environment for any long-term peace plan to take root. How do you convince people to buy into a two-state solution when violence and displacement are escalating in both Gaza and the West Bank?
That is the question mediators face every morning. This moment is defined by a complete disconnect between diplomatic ambition and ground reality.
Richard, let's offer our listeners 3 final contexts to understand this chaotic phase of the conflict.
1. The ceasefire as a strategic tool. The truce is not a cessation of conflict, but a redistribution of risk. For Israel, it allows for targeted, high-value economic warfare, like the killing of the supply chief Hadidi, while deflecting major international pressure. For Hamas, it allows them to regroup and reorganize within the shelter of the de facto humanitarian zone, even as they face heavy losses. 2. The new humanitarian weapon. The combination of winter, flooding, and collapsed sanitation has weaponized the environment itself. The majority of deaths are no longer just coming from ordnance, but from the slow, agonizing spread of disease and exposure, a profound indictment of the limits of humanitarian access and the fragility of the truce. 3. The illusion of governance. The UN resolution endorsing the stabilization force and a reformed Palestinian Authority is currently an empty diplomatic vessel, without full political buy-in from all major regional and local actors, especially Hamas. It remains a post-war fantasy, being planned while the war is still very much active. That is the question mediators face every morning. This moment is defined by a complete disconnect between diplomatic ambition and ground reality.
I'll add my own final reflection. The international community is actively prioritizing the safe return of the remaining few hostages and the political structure of a future Gaza over the immediate and verifiable safety of the civilians who remain. The 2 children dying every day, as reported by UNICEF, are the painful price of prioritizing political architecture over human life. We leave our listeners with this question. If the world's most powerful nations and the UN cannot enforce a truce, what actual mechanism is left to prevent the complete and catastrophic collapse of all human life and infrastructure in the Gaza Strip?
A difficult question, indeed. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you all for watching and listening to the Context channel.